Thanks. So let me start this talk by explaining what we mean when we say automatic visual censoring. So I try to illustrate it with a science fiction show that I think most of you actually know now, Black Mirror, and a specific episode called Archangel. So in Archangel, we follow a little girl whose mom decided to follow the Archangel program. And the Archangel program consists in putting a chip in her daughter's brain so that she can follow her GPS location, sees what she sees in real time, have access to what she saw or heard through the day. But there's also an interesting feature that is present in the Archangel program, which is the possibility to actually activate or deactivate the automated censoring of possibly offensive or shocking content. And so this is the kind of things that you would see when one of her classmates starts swearing and making very explicit gestures. So she doesn't hear her classmate and she doesn't see what he's doing with his hands. Similarly, this is what she sees when the neighbor's dog starts barking. So she doesn't hear the dog properly and she doesn't see the dog either. But Black Mirror being Black Mirror, this leads to a complicated situation and the girl eventually harming herself a lot, and more things coming as well, but that's spoilers. If you haven't seen this episode, I really recommend you check it out. It's quite interesting. But apart from the very dramatic consequences that are depicted in the episode, the automated processing and censoring of images is actually quite useful. So a few years before the show started, a researcher of one of my team in Paris went to a lecture and learned about a new eye surgery procedure through images and videos. And it was like, well, that's quite interesting and all, but looking at this picture is a bit hard for me. It would be quite nice if it was just a little bit less gross, but still informative. And that was the beginning of our journey to try and reduce the affective responses to possibly shocking content automatically. Now, a picture is always worth 1,000 words, so I'm going to try to explain how we got there with this very nice mock-up of a surgery picture. So I've been giving this talk a couple of times, and trust me, by the end of it, you'll be either disgusted by lasagna or very hungry, one of these two. Anyways, a very easy way to make this pseudo-surgery image look less shocking is to just blur it out the Archangel way. But when we do that, if you recall our goal with the eye surgery procedure image, we can't see anything. All the details are gone. So we cannot learn anything from this image anymore. So in the image processing research communities, people have started developing some more smarter technologies to blur images. So for instance, I'm going to show you 4 of them there. So there's this one here, this one here, this one here, and this one. And you see that all of them somehow preserve some details, but not all of them. And maybe that could lead to still us getting some information from the image, but the images being a bit less repulsive somehow. But we also thought, okay, maybe we can learn something from other places, right? So we decided to look at movies, the video game industry, books, paintings, and drawings. And so one of the easy way to make this image less shocking would be possibly to just remove the colors, right? That's what Tarantino did in Kill Bill when he was asked to tone down the violence of some of the scenes that were in the movie. Another way to do it would be to possibly just change the color of blood. Maybe we just don't like the color of blood. And that's what video games have been doing for a while. If you think about, for instance, The Legend of Zelda, Ocarina of Time, or Mortal Kombat, even back in the days. Now, if we look at books, specifically mangas, for instance, some of them are pretty violent, and you see that they all tend to have this accentuation of edges and the black and white as well. So that's something we could also look at. If we look at comics, mostly with superheroes, also some of them are very, very violent, like Deadpool. But kids seem to read them just fine, so maybe something like this with this cartoonish rendering would work. And then we thought, okay, let's look at what people have done, for instance, with this painterly rendering there, or some more watercolor version of the image, or maybe an oil paint version of it. And maybe, why not, some drawing techniques like this hatching or this stippling. So if we come back to the eye surgery procedure, we wanted to know whether these techniques that I've just shown can actually preserve information. So what we did, we contacted 4 surgeons and asked them to send us 3 pictures of their surgeries that we processed with all the techniques I've shown. And then we printed the results. So we had a total of 14 different versions of an image, 1 original and 13 processed images, and we asked surgeons to rank them depending on how useful they could be for them to communicate with patients. And based on this plus interviews, we actually thought that these 6 techniques here, so the change of color, the black and white version, 3 of the smart blur technique, and the cartoon rendering would be interesting techniques to study. But again, now we only know what could potentially preserve information, but we also want to make these images less repulsive. And to achieve that, you can guess that surgeons are not really good patients for us. We can't use them. They are used to seeing that all the time, so we can't ask them to just tell us. So what we did, we actually recruited lay people like you and me, and we asked them to look at 5 surgery pictures, again, mock-ups here. And we processed these 5 surgery pictures with the 6 techniques that I just showed before. And the participants had to basically go through them and answer a couple of questions on a computer screen. So the interface looked like this. They would see the image for 2 seconds. Then we would put some noise on it so that they don't get used to the image and to the violence. And then we would just ask them these 2 questions. How difficult was it for you to look at the image, and how difficult was it for you to recognize the image's content? Based on the results of this, it would seem that this cartoonish rendering, the flow apps technique, seems to be the best technique that we have to both preserve information and reduce repulsiveness of surgery images. Now, something that is also interesting with that technique is that participants of the experiment actually reported that thanks to that, this cartoonish effect, they felt that the image they were looking at was less real, so they could detach themselves from it. One of the good news is that we checked later with surgeons, and that actually also works on videos. So you can see again a mock-up here, so which is something that would be also interesting in case of surgeries. Now, because of the characteristic of the images we looked at, surgery, so they all have blood, wounds, possibly visible organs, we can actually expect that the technique would work on other forms of very violent content, such as accidents maybe, or war scenes. But the cartoonish effects that we obtain on each picture could also lead to interesting effects on other kind of images that do not have these features. We can, for instance, think of other medical images that do not contain blood, but maybe like skin disease examples. And we cannot exclude that it could also work on pornography or nudity. Now you might think, okay, this is all nice, but I'm not going to Google for these images anyways. I don't want to see them, right? But even if you don't want to see them, you're actually quite likely to encounter them on a daily basis through your daily browsing experiences. I'm going to illustrate that just now. So let's imagine we're in secondary school in Germany and trying to do a project on crocodiles. We look for images to put in our project report. And on the first page on Google Image, nothing out of the ordinary. But if we scroll down a bit, this image just there, that I replaced with the lasagna picture, is actually an image of what the crocodile drug does to its users. And so the crocodile drug is also known as the flesh-eating drug. So you can imagine that this image is very, very disturbing. Definitely not something you want to see as a secondary school kid. But this goes far beyond Google Image. If you look at social media, for instance, so here's Facebook, graphic content policy, and we can see that they do allow graphic content with some limitations, of course, to help people raise awareness about specific issues. And if we look at what they allow, well, the list contains dismemberment, cannibalism, throat slitting, and so on. A very nice list to go through. If we look at Twitter, it seems to be better first, because they say you may not post media that is excessively gory or share violent or adult content within live video or in profile or header images. But if we read further down, we actually see if you share this content within tweets, you need to mark your account as sensitive. So actually, you can still share that content within tweets. Now, if we look finally at Wikipedia, that a lot of people use to inform themselves, Wikipedia has had a clear policy on censoring for a while. But they state on their website that the Wikimedia projects do generally contain materials that some audiences may find inappropriate or offensive. So because of all of that, you're actually quite likely, as a normal person browsing through the internet, to just encounter this kind of images that you might not want to see. So because of that, we have decided to try and develop a prototype Google Chrome extension that would actually filter all these images right away with the flow apps technique that we saw before was good for preserving information and reducing repulsiveness. So we call the extension Archangel as a kind of tribute to the Black Mirror episode. And this is how it works. If we Google for now your favorite dish, lasagna, you see that all the pictures have been processed with that kind of cartoon effect. But now what's the difference between our extension, Archangel, and the Archangel that was in Black Mirror? Well, in Black Mirror, parents decided for the kids what they should look at, basically. In our case, we give the control to the user all the time. So that means that they can simply turn off the extension whenever they want, but they can also always show the original image behind the processed one. So they just right-click on an image, and then they see that the cartoon effect disappears. In a new version that we're trying to work on right now, we also give more control to the user by trying to ask them what kind of images they want to filter out. So they can decide whether they want to see violent content or not, nudity or not, or medical images or not. And then they can also decide how strong the processing of the image is going to be. But beyond all of this social media and Wikipedia browsing, these visual censoring technologies are actually interesting in a variety of contexts. So let's take this picture, for example, that was shared by L 2014. So L 2014 is a national animal rights organization in France, a bit like PETA, if you want. And they often promote animal rights and plant-based diets online by sharing photos and videos of the daily life of pigs or other animals to try and show what happens behind closed doors. And very often their content is way more graphic than that. So that leads people to actually seeing that the content is probably too hardcore for them, so they just don't look at it. But maybe with the kind of extension that we actually propose to use now, people would be able to look at it and inform themselves. So these associations could reach a wider audience. But it could also alleviate the impact of difficult stimuli that people have to go through for their daily work. So for instance, right now in America, they are experimenting with live stream calls when you have actually an emergency situation and you dial 911. So the 911 operators are actually transmitted a live call of what's happening to you, but they're not trained or here to actually see this kind of really traumatizing content like a murder could be or car accident could be. So that it has an impact on their mental health, obviously. And we could easily imagine that the extension that we actually provide now could be modified to just directly modify the live stream they get. There's a lot of talk also today about how it is difficult to be a social media moderator. So the idea behind their job is that they have to look at content that has been flagged on social media platforms to decide whether or not it is suitable for the platform. And so they have to sit through hours of very disturbing content, videos and images, and then decide whether or not it should stay online. And that has a crazy impact on their mental health. There's lots of reports on this. So perhaps we could use a visual censoring technology like ours for their job to make it, at least partially, a bit easier. But that could also be used by police officers when they have to go through images or videos from criminal computers to try and find evidence or identify victims. Or even by newspapers editors when they have to decide which picture is going to make it to the final version of the article. They have to go through thousands of pictures usually, but when it's pictures of war zones, you can imagine it's not really a nice thing to do. Now, all of these ideas are really nice compared to the use that was made in Black Mirror. But the very nice thing in Black Mirror was that all of this was done in real time. It was not done on your computer, it was done directly through your eyes. So that could, for instance, allow you to directly go and see in surgery and learn by yourself, which would be really, really nice. But how far are we from this kind of things from happening? Well, if it comes to brain implants, there's lots of research being done now. It has happened with animals for research and military purposes, as far as I know, but we're really not there yet, I would argue. But what if we think more about wearable technology, for instance, something that we just wear all the time? I'm sure most of you have seen or used actually noise-canceling headsets, right? So what they do is just analyze your background noise and try to eliminate it for you actively. We could imagine just changing that a little bit so that it would detect specific words and just remove them from you right away. And if we think about visual stimuli, let's just think about how we could adapt the Google Glass project. The camera on the Google glasses could just directly analyze what could be shocking for you and project an additional blur on top of the glasses or even on your eye directly. Doesn't seem too complicated. And it's actually currently a focus of research of the diminished reality community. So they basically remove real objects from the real world based on the headset you're wearing. So what you see is a modified version of the reality, and that seems to work pretty well, actually. But one thing I particularly like about Black Mirror is the fact that they make us question the impact of current technologies or future technologies on society. And with automatic visual censoring technologies, there's obviously some questions that we need to explore, but also some ethical concern and possible misuses that needs to be mentioned. So if we think again of the example of newspapers, images, or maybe animal rights associations images, would somehow creating some kind of version of the image like this would it make the images less efficient in communicating the atrocities of a specific event? That's a possibility. It's just like to somehow sugarcoat what's happening and therefore make the image fail its purpose of shocking to inform the public. That's possible. Second question is for social media moderators. If we alter the content that they look at, can they still do their job properly? Can they still decide what should be online or not? That's something that we actually currently don't know, something that our team is very interested in investigating, and we're really looking forward to being in touch with people who do it or a firm that does it. That would be very, very nice. Now, if we think again of a vast adoption of the technology in wearable devices, for instance, is it likely somehow, if you wear it every day, to just attenuate the impact of dangerous situation and lead to self-harm, for instance, as it was depicted in the Black Mirror episode? That's something that is possible. It could just desensitize us completely to situations that actually have to make us scared or nervous. That's something we have to be careful of as well. And one last thing we really have to be careful of is that if we adopt this kind of technology, we should always give control to users. And we should not give control to institutions or governments who could use it to basically make it easier for military people or even lay people to actually kill or torture. I was depicted in another Black Mirror episode called Men Against Fire. But without projecting ourselves too far in the future, I believe that with visual censoring technology, and for now our Archangel extension, we can actually empower users in making informed decisions about things. We can give them the tools to actually satisfy their curiosity, but we can also probably help people who have to sit through very disturbing content for their work all the time. As I've shown, there's still some specific research question that needs to be tackled, some specific ethical problem that needs to be mentioned and investigated, but I hope that the presentation that I gave today will help start some of these discussions. If you want more information about the project or maybe potentially try out the extension, the link is there. Thank you very much.